just over 160 years ago, near today's Bayport, Michigan. Just north of this quiet fishery and harbor town, a German Methodist colony tried to build heaven out of timber, mud, prayer, and debt. The place chosen for Ora Labora did not forgive mistakes. It lay on the edge of Wild Fowl Bay in the Upper Thumb, in a country that on paper could be sold as promise, but on the ground had to be hacked, drained, and defended by hand. There were stands of pine and hardwood, marsh ground, mosquitoes in force, and long distances between hope and profit. Yet this was exactly the sort of country that tempted men with a scheme for beginning again. In the early 1860s, Michigan was still pitching land to immigrants, and Emil Baur thought he saw in that wet northern margin a place where piety and labor might be bound together into one life. He did not mean to found merely a village. He meant to found a moral order. Baur was not a backwoods drifter or a reckless promoter without education. He was a native of Württemberg, the son of a Lutheran pastor, educated at Bloboren and for a time at Tübingen, where his uncle Ferdinand Christian Baur was a noted scholar. After the revolutions of 1848, he came to the United States, settled in Pittsburgh, and entered the German Methodist world, shaped by William Nast. The colony that would become Ora Labora grew out of that setting. It was not a stray frontier impulse. It was a church-rooted immigrant reform project, and Baur believed it could rescue working families from city misery by restoring them to land, discipline, and religious community. To carry out that plan, Baur needed money, approval, and distance from the ordinary temptations of town life. He got all three, at least for a time. According to Wittke, the state land office approved the undertaking, and Baur persuaded the Harmony Society at Economy, Pennsylvania, to advance $20,000 secured by mortgage. Michigan Public's later interview with state archivist Mark Harvey fits that same outline. Baur drew on the example of successful communitarian societies and picked Michigan at a moment when the state was actively courting German settlers. This mattered because Ora Labora was born at the meeting point of religion, migration, and land policy. It was not simple faith alone that built it. It was faith financed by credit and aimed at the frontier. Then came the hard part, which was everything after the founding speech. By early 1863, 28 families were on the ground, and the work was immediate. Timber had to come down. Shelter had to rise fast. Thumwind's reconstruction, supported in broad outline by older county and church histories, shows the colonists erecting communal blockhouses, a general store, a sawmill, and a grist mill. Wages were paid for labor. A community bake oven turned out bread. A tannery cured hides. A post office linked the settlement to the outside world. In time, there were shingles, rough-cut boards, and telegraph poles to sell. To a visitor, and to Baur himself, these were signs that the thing was becoming real. It had streets, it had production, it had mail, it had a name. But the land exacted a price. Gwynn's 1922 county history, preserving older recollection, stressed the swampy character of the tract, the expense of ditching, and the remoteness of Bay City as the nearest real market. Fever and ague were common. The 1982 historical article, drawing from community records and recollection, added the frontline facts of frontier living. Families with cows, pigs, chickens, geese, and houses shuddered at night against wolves and other predators. What from afar had looked like a Christian agricultural settlement turned out, at close range, to be a logging camp, drainage scheme, road project, and survival exercise all at once. Ora Labora was supposed to be a field of grace. Much of the time, it was a work site under siege from nature, debt, and distance. There was another weakness, quieter but just as damaging. The settlers were not, for the most part, seasoned farmers. Wittke wrote that many recruits were artisans and laborers with little agricultural background. The 1982 church history said much the same in sharper terms. They were city mechanics, earnest people, but badly matched to a wilderness colony that demanded woodscraft as much as devotion. They had to learn logging, ditching, fencing, fishing, hunting, and late-start farming at once. In a looser economy, some families might have muddled through. In a communal one, where work discipline and shared stores depended on trust, inexperience became a political problem. The colony could forgive poor soil sooner than it could forgive poor output. And then the Civil War drew closer. That pressure appears again and again in the Thumbwind series, in Gwynn's history, and in Witke's article. Men were drafted. The colony lacked money for substitutes. Gwynn's preserved account made the point starkly. The settlers were too poor to buy exemptions and too conscientious to flee to Canada, as some others did. The result was not heroic in the neat public sense. It was worse. It left women, children, and old men to keep a half-cleared colony moving with too little labor, too little cash, and too much timber yet standing. That was the blow from which Ora Labora never fully recovered. Baur answered with schemes, letters, and endurance. In 1864, as Thumbwind shows and Witke confirms, one line of support after another weakened. Ahrens, publisher of the Apologete and once a major ally, withdrew his enthusiasm. Baur then tried the classic expedients of a liquidity crisis. He laid out town lots. He sold shares. He proposed institutions that might attract backing, including an orphanage. He wrote because writing was one of the few tools left to him. Every letter sought time, credit, or reinforcements. None solved the base problem that too much of Ora Labora's future had already been mortgaged to keep its present alive. Christmas Eve. 1864 brings the story into even sharper focus. The story places Baur alone in Bay City, writing to Harmony's trustees for provisions and relief from interest. He also imagined a dock long enough to bring steamers into regular contact with the colony and seized on a possible salt venture after correspondence with Alexander Winchell. Winchell's broader geological writing helps explain why such a plan did not sound absurd in Michigan at the time. Brine and salt prospects were very much part of the state's economic imagination. But Harmony's trustees were not persuaded. They offered more money only under stricter terms, and they regarded salt-making as a poor gamble. Baur kept seeing openings. His backers kept seeing liabilities. That divide between vision and balance sheet is at the center of Ora Labora's end. Yet to an outsider in 1865, the colony could still look impressive. The Huron County news editor, in the passage preserved by Gwynn and repeated by Witke, found 140 people there, heads of families, single men, wives, children, and voters. He reported 3,000 acres purchased and 10,000 more under contract, 160 acres cleared, a sawmill and grist mill in operation, a dock built into the bay, and an island meant for grapes. He saw order in the streets and fruit trees planted in the old country fashion. It is one of the great moments in the record because it catches Ora Labora in the brief interval when appearance and ambition still nearly matched. The place did not look finished, but it looked possible. That possibility did not last. Beneath the neat streets and fruit trees, the books were souring. By late 1865 and early 1866, the returned veterans Louis Fall and Jacob Kolb were at odds with Baur. One reconstruction, based on correspondence and local research, describes accusations of theft, profiteering, mismanagement, and bad faith. The post office became another point of damage. So did wages, store goods, and credit. The 1982 article, using the colony's journal and ledger, shows how narrow the margin had become. Lower pay, rationing, cash-only tobacco, arguments over officers, and piecemeal distribution of groceries and tools. This was not the dramatic instant of a town going up in flames. It was the slower and more bitter sight of a community ceasing to agree on what it was. The legal end came by degrees. Witke wrote that Baur and two fellow officers withdrew before the end of 1866, and that the final dissolution, by Baur's own account, came in 1868. Act 429 of 1867 and later settlement terms helped transfer some land into private holdings, with 40 or 80 acres tied to work on improvements or service. Gwynn's account likewise said some ex-colonists stayed, moved on to individual farms, and slowly built independent lives. That is essential to the story. Ora Labora failed as a commune, but it did not vanish without heirs. It left roads, cleared ground, orchards, church networks, farm families, and a pattern of settlement that helped shape the upper thumb after the experiment itself was over. Baur, for his part, did not stay to haunt the ruins. He moved to Ann Arbor in 1867, taught German, became active in horticulture, and was remembered there less as a failed communitarian than as a teacher and fruit grower. The Ann Arbor papers recorded his death in 1894 after a winter illness. His afterlife in the record is almost painfully ordinary. That may be the strongest closing note of all. Men who try to found new worlds rarely end their days inside them. Baur's did not. He outlived Ora Labora and then became a local man somewhere else. Still, the colony's story did not end when its meetings ended. Late in 1871, the Harmony mortgage was foreclosed, and the land was deeded back to the Pennsylvania Society. In that same year, fire moved across the thumb, and later letter stories say Harmony sent $200 to aid the needy, including Native people, at the former colony grounds. Whether one treats that episode as relief work, debt management, or one final act of obligation, it fixes the last severe image of Ora Labora in the historical mind. Not a thriving godly town, but a half-broken settlement in a burned district, where even the remains had to be accounted for. Ora Labora matters because it was not merely a failure. Michigan has had many failed towns. This one shows something harder to measure: how immigrant religion, land policy, wartime state power, and frontier economics could meet in one small place and grind against one another until the ideal cracked. In the end, the colony did what many broken communities do. It did not wholly disappear. It scattered into farms, names, churches, papers, graves, and local memory. The commune died. The work remained. Thanks for listening. To read details about the fascinating story of Ora Labora, look for the link in the episode description.